There we go.
Good. So the webinar that we held at the end of April focused to a substantial extent on wetlands, and interviewed Scott Peck from the Hamilton Conservation Authority. Scott is the deputy director there and the main planner and key staff person that is involved in what we're discussing tonight as well. And he described what the Conservation Authority is developing in Upper Stony Creek, which is trying to reestablish or create even new, but mainly reestablish wetlands in the watersheds of Battlefield Creek and Stony Creek to reduce flooding in Lower Stony Creek. One of the main things that wetlands do is they reduce flooding. And we have big wetlands in the Spencer Creek watershed, which certainly reduce the amount of flooding, not to zero, unfortunately, in Dundas. So they play a significant role, and they're also significant habitat. And we'll talk a little bit about that here. In Ancaster Creek, there are only 2 remaining wetlands. There was a study done by the Conservation Authority in 2009, and I can quote a little bit from it. Historically, wetland cover made up 8% of the subwatershed area, and now only 0.3% of the subwatershed area is still in wetlands. So 96% of its historical wetland cover has already been lost. That's higher than even across the southern Ontario, where it's about 75% of wetlands have disappeared. And that's a significant hit on the natural environment. And we're paying the price of that in terms of the flooding we're seeing as climate change gets more severe. The way in which we look at wetlands provincially is they have been evaluated starting in the late 70s, early 1980s to determine what are the most significant wetlands. And essentially there were 2 categories, provincially significant and locally significant. And then there's a 3rd category that is kicked around, which is called unevaluated, because that process of evaluation largely got abandoned, particularly by the Harris government and beyond. So we've seen pretty much nothing in the way of evaluation of wetlands since the mid-1990s. And as a result, there are wetlands around which are listed as unevaluated. And the proponents who are coming forward with the application to relocate the wetland in Upper Ancaster Creek have taken advantage of this to declare that this is a non-significant wetland. The staff at the Conservation Authority, specifically Scott Peck, who wrote the staff report, have countered with this is a locally significant wetland. Because if you're not provincially significant, then you're locally significant, because all wetlands are by definition under provincial law significant. They are playing significant roles and the loss is fairly large. So what's being proposed here tonight by a group of developers is replacing an existing wetland and the stream that flows through it, Ancaster Creek. This is the headwaters of Ancaster Creek, one of 3 tributaries that combine to form Ancaster Creek. They're proposing to replace this wetland and this stream with 5 warehouses and an immense amount of parking. I tried counting it all. There's maybe 1,000 parking spaces that we're looking at in this, because they're suggesting that there may be 3,000. In fact, they're promising that there will be 3,000 people employed in these 5 warehouses. And as a result, the land that has been, this whole property is going to pretty much be paved or built over. This is the property you're seeing on the left is where it is now. So the green area with the stream flowing through it is the wetland that is proposed to be replaced, and the creek flowing through it. And the rest of the area is been used for agricultural purposes. So it has been an area that absorbs rainwater and reduces the amount of flooding downstream. And that will change with the proposal on the right, which is the 5 warehouses. And we're if you got to zoom in on that, you would see that between them, there's a lot of parking, and along the edges, there's a lot of parking. There's roads being constructed as part of this proposal. And on the right-hand side is looking very nice and sweet, is the proposed new wetland, which the developers plan, say that they will develop in place of the one that they're destroying. And it's not all wetland there. It's only the portion, Garner Road runs across the top there. So the portion closest to Garner Road, the larger blue area, water area, is not wetland. It's a stormwater pond, because when you pave the way these guys are planning on paving, you have to take measures to ensure that there is no increase in the flow of water off your site at peak times. So they're required to build a stormwater pond. So that's being put in place as part of this proposal. And the rest of it further along there in the between the two central warehouses, or beside the two central warehouses, is the proposed replacement wetland. And immediately to the right of that is Highway 6. And Highway 6, as you probably know, has now been announced that they're going to widen it to 4 lanes. That's the Highway 6 extension. So the wetland will now be squeezed, the new wetland, between 5 warehouses on one side and all the parking associated with that, and a 4-lane highway on the other side. This has not been addressed as part of the proposal that has been put forward, but you can imagine trying to be a frog in a place like this. So as soon as you step outside that wetland, and frogs do, you're either going to be on a paved parking lot or you're going to be on a highway. And I suspect you're not going to survive very long. The creek disappears here, but it is alleged by the developers that they're going to make a hydrological connection between the upper portion of the creek, which is below the low part of the image there, and the wetland itself. So presumably pipes that run underneath the warehouses. So that's the proposal. That's what they want to achieve. And they have come before, they're coming before the Conservation Authority tonight in what is called a Section 28 hearing, in which the Conservation Authority Board rules on whether or not they will accept this proposal. Interestingly, significantly, the Conservation Authority rules say you can't do this. Relocation of wetlands is not part of the policies established by the Conservation Authority, and they are under provincial law and under municipal rules as well. They're required to preserve wetlands. So the wetland we're looking at on the left, as I said, it's got 2 colors. It's got the green in the center, and then it's got some yellow around it. The yellow is the buffer zone. So for a locally significant wetland, you must have a buffer zone of at least 30 meters. For a provincially significant wetland, it goes up to 100 meters. So that's why the yellow is there. That indicates where the buffer zone would be for this particular wetland. There was an earlier proposal for development on this site, and it promised to maintain both the wetland and its buffer zone and do whatever building they wanted to do outside of that. It still would be problematic for that area, but not nearly as much so as what we're looking at here. Interestingly as well, the new wetland that they're proposing, which they say is a little bit bigger than this one on their measurements, is only got a 15-meter buffer, even though the law says 30 meters is the minimum. So it will be interesting to see what they have to say about that tonight if they get asked about that. I think that sort of explains the proposal. There may well be questions come along, but we'll get a chance to talk about it. So what's the background to this? We've been following the Conservation Authority meetings, and this one came as a bit of a surprise. What has happened is last fall, actually before Bill 229, the developers who want to utilize this property came before the Conservation Authority with an idea that they wanted to relocate this wetland. And they suggested that some other conservation authorities have already created a policy that allows, in extreme circumstances as a last resort, that wetlands can be relocated. That proposal, that information was taken by the Conservation Authority Board. They divided on this. They were not unanimous, but the majority said, okay, staff, we want you to go back and we want you to figure out what a policy would look like that would allow for wetlands to be relocated, and under what circumstances and in what situations, and what compensation would be required, and so on and so forth. So that wetland offsetting policy was prepared by staff in a draft form, and it was presented at the April 1 meeting, the last meeting of the Hamilton Conservation Authority. And it was then directed that it would go out for public consultation starting beginning of this month and running through the summer, and that a final version would come before the Conservation Authority Board in September to determine whether or not they wanted to have a policy like that and what that policy would look like. So that was we were following that. We expected that was there would be a consultation going on. We were encouraging people to watch for that and make sure that they put their comments in. And then we look at the agenda for this meeting, and guess what? The developers have decided they're not going to wait for that. They're jumping ahead and they want to get a decision now. It may be that they've looked at the draft and decided that it's really not likely that they're going to get permission through that policy, or that policy may well, because there was quite a lot of opposition to even continuing this endeavor to prepare an offset policy. They may have figured that this is not going to work out for them. So let's go for it right now before anybody has figured out what exactly this means. And so we have now got an agenda, which unfortunately is posted less than 2 weeks before the meeting takes place. And there is a rule that if you want to delegate at the Conservation Authority, if you as a citizen want to speak there, you need to request to make that delegation at least 2 weeks in advance of the meeting. Now, I've made a request to speak. I think at least one other person has made a request to speak tonight. It is possible that I will be allowed to speak, and it's possible that I will not be allowed to speak. That will be a decision that will be made by the board at the beginning of the meeting. So I may get a chance to do many of the things that I'm talking about here tonight in front of the Conservation Authority. I'll get 10 minutes if that's approved. And hopefully, if it is approved, it will be approved that I can speak before the meeting, that the section of the meeting which determines this proposal, because during the section of the meeting, which is called a Section 28 hearing, there are no third parties allowed. It is simply the staff and the board and the proponent who are able to participate in that. So I could get to speak, but after all that takes place and after not having any effect on it. But nevertheless, I'm taking a run at it and seeing what I can do. So the short notice is a problem. It's one of the things that we're running into as we examine how the conservation authorities function. These are bodies which, as I said, are very significant. They do a lot of things. They take care of, in the Spencer Creek watershed, about 1,100 hectares of land. The Dundas Valley, the Valence Conservation Area, the Christie Conservation Area, the Beverly Swamp. Much of these areas are owned by the Conservation Authority. All of the Spencer Creek watershed, the Red Hill Creek watershed, the Shadoke Creek watershed are all under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Authority, and they make lots of these kinds of decisions for proposals for changes that take place in these areas, and they do take initiatives. The Conservation Authority we're dealing with here is a bit unique. The Spencer Creek watershed was the original part of this, the original basis of this Conservation Authority, and the other creeks that were added are all within the boundaries of the city of Hamilton. Spencer Creek actually starts up in Puss Lynch. So there are representatives on the Conservation Authority, Hamilton Conservation Authority from Hamilton and from Puslinch, 10 from Hamilton and 1 from Puslinch. And the 10 from Hamilton, 5 are city council members, Brad Clark, Esther Pauls, Chad Collins, Tom Jackson, and Lloyd Ferguson, and 5 citizens that are appointed by the city council. So that's the lay of the land for the Hamilton Conservation Authority, but most conservation authorities extend across a number of municipal boundaries, and as a result, they have representatives from many different ones. So the Grand River Conservation Authority, as an example, has representation from 32 municipalities. And when you have that kind of mix of representation, it's much harder for an agenda and issues to be controlled overwhelmingly by one city council. So we have something a bit strange here, and Halton has extends over to takes in Oakville and Burlington and Halton Hills and the whole of Halton region and other areas that are fitting into that. The Toronto Region Conservation Authority has many municipalities that are part of it. And that's usually the norm, but we are a bit of a different one here. And that's put us in a bit of a position of, okay, so what's, how do we ensure that this is not just a subcommittee of Hamilton City Council? And what the provincial government has now done is it said, get rid of the citizens. We don't want citizens on these boards. The citizens, initially the province said, all citizens off these boards. We just want city councilors. Citizens, I guess, are problematic because they're independent of city councils and independent of the political system. But anyway, that got changed as a result of some of the pushback on that. And they ended up saying, okay, 70% of the delegates from any council, any municipality must be council members. So that means if you've got less than 4 members of your council, of your city that are allowed on the Conservation Authority, they all have to be city councilors. If you get 4, then 1 could be a citizen. If you get 10 in this case, we could have 3 citizens from Hamilton instead of the 5 that are there now. That change is due to take place next year after the next municipal elections.
And Dawn, would you just mind clarifying? So when the province was rolling out Bill 229 that had all of these things like a takeover of CAs and getting citizen members off, you know, taking them at their word, how did they market these changes? Or like, what did they say was their justification for putting forward these things? Even if, you know, when you read the policy, it's clearly not doing that.
The justification was increasing efficiency generally. As in the main one, the general justification the province has used for pretty much everything is building more affordable housing, but conservation authorities don't build housing, but they can stand in the way of, because they're protecting significant environmental features and wetlands and stream flow and so on. So this becomes an obstacle to decision-making. And so the province can characterize this as red tape, but it's part of the reason that we have some possibilities of citizens getting heard within the decision-making process. So instead of just having all decisions being made by Mr. Premier, which is apparently what Mr. Premier seems to think he should be able to do, as Mr. President thought he should be able to do in the US until recently. Instead, we have a lot of different decision makers. We have municipal councils, we have conservation authorities, which are not necessarily wings of municipal councils, but maybe composed of many municipal council representatives and citizens. We have other boards that make decisions. And the direction that the province has been going in is to try to get all these out of the way so they can make the decisions. And the extreme feature of that is the ministerial zoning order, in which they simply come in and say, okay, we are now making a decision to approve this with no public consultation, with nobody else can get in our way. Municipal councils can't say anything about it. Conservation authorities can't say anything about it, or if they say something about it, we can overrule them, and they must issue a permit if there's a ministerial zoning order. The one we're dealing with tonight is not yet a ministerial zoning order, but that certainly is a threat that is hanging over this situation. Does that answer the question, Alex?
Yeah, and then sorry, I'll just go back for a second. Given that we've been doing some watching, one of the things the government said is that they were also increasing the accountability and the transparency of CAs. And we found that that does vary a little bit between conservation authorities. How are conservation watch volunteers in the Halton and Credit Valley conservation authorities faring with their watches?
What they're finding is that they can't get on to actually watch the meetings, and that the meetings are not recorded and made available to the public afterwards. And that's different from each conservation authority. The Hamilton Conservation Authority was operating that way before, although they allowed you to get on and watch if you were there at the time of the meeting. Subsequently, under requests from us, they've made the video of the meeting available for 1 month afterwards. So it's up until the next meeting, which will be, the one tonight will be up until their next meeting in early June. The Halton and Credit Valley, the Credit Valley one didn't seem to think that anybody should be able to watch at all. We're working on explaining to them that there is actually provincial law that requires them to record the meetings and make the recordings available to the public at the time of the meeting and afterwards. We've written to both Halton and Credit Valley with respect to that. The Niagara one automatically records and makes the recordings available, and as does the Grand River one.
And I guess one of the noted things that we flagged at the April conservation meeting was some of the comments by Chairperson Lloyd Ferguson, who's also the Ancaster City Councillor, seemed to be concerning kind of the economic development of the proposal, which is, that's him wearing a city councillor hat. That's not actually a consideration that conservation authorities need to be considering. So that's kind of drawn some concerns, but earlier today we were having a conversation about lobbying, and you were explaining the city of Hamilton lobbying rules to me. Could you explain them to everyone else? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, the city of Hamilton officially has a lobbyist registry, but it's an extremely weak lobbyist registry, and there are some very interesting exemptions. So if you're a lobbyist, you're supposed to register. There's no tracking of what exactly how many times you lobby somebody or what exactly you talk to them about. You just have to give a general statement of what you're interested in and who you expect to lobby. But if you are lobbying somebody who lives in the same or represents the same part of the city that you live in or have your business in, you don't have to register. So Ancaster residents and Ancaster companies do not have to register to lobby the Ancaster councillor, Lloyd Ferguson. And across the whole city, if you're a company or a resident of the city of Hamilton, you don't have to register to lobby the mayor under the same logic that he's your representative. So you don't have to be identified as a lobbyist. Now, that's also a really strange way of identifying lobbying, because lobbying is not calling your councillor and asking them or giving your opinion on or whatever. That's normal process of a democracy. Lobbying is when you have a financial stake in something and you want the council and your councillor, your representative, to make sure that you represent their financial interests. And the Hamilton's rules really don't understand that, or intentionally don't understand that. So we have a situation which is pretty strange here. So we can anticipate possibly that the chair of the Conservation Authority, Mr. Ferguson, who was also the Ancaster councillor, may have been lobbied in advance about this project, but it wouldn't be called lobbying. It would not be defined lobbying in the Hamilton rules.
Yeah, and I guess this really raises the question now, why wetlands are at risk. I can kind of quickly cover some of these points, and then because I think we have a lot of folks asking questions in the chat, so we want to get to those. So I might just, if you're okay, Dawn, just kind of
Sure.
jump through the last few slides, and then we can always come back to them if folks have questions about them. But essentially, these kind of charts from the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario in 2018. Now, this is a position that no longer exists, and it was cut by the current Ford government. But essentially, they act as an independent officer meant for kind of assessing our environmental targets, our climate targets, and looking at how we're doing. And in 2018, the Environmental Commissioner released a report about our wetland area. And here you can see that it's just, oh my goodness, we've lost about 75% to 3/4 of our historic wetlands. And this is happening globally. In fact, now Ontario holds about 6% of the remaining wetlands in the world and 25% of Canada's total. Yet we know of that, we have already lost so much, and yet we're still, so significant in the world. So I think that really, like, all of the conservation and all of the protection that we do here, has really global impacts when it comes to protecting our wetlands. And just further to that, we did have at our last webinar, we focused on how water protection is happening across the province. And we looked at communities on the front lines like Grassy Narrows, the work being done here in Hamilton to protect our water, and how Indigenous communities and Indigenous women particularly are really on the front lines of this water protection. So that's on our YouTube channel. Really encourage folks to use that as a resource to kind of get more oriented at, who's on the front lines of water work in our province and how can we support them. But yeah, looking at why our wetlands are at risk, as Dawn kind of mentioned earlier, it's nice for governments. We've seen this at the federal level too, to kind of say they have targets or say wetlands and nature are important. But when the follow-up happens, it's just not really there. So this is a quote from Ontario's Environmental Commissioner that basically is saying that the province has long failed to confront the leading causes of wetland loss, leaving even our most significant wetland habitats vulnerable to destruction. And the second leading cause of wetland loss is development. So this is the second largest reason that we are losing wetlands in Ontario, and we still don't have clear policies, despite this being flagged as a problem for years now, and clear recommendations on government for what they should do about it. And so here are some of those recommendations that our provincial government hasn't acted on. So first, that we need to, given that our wetland evaluation system is so slow, that we should just presume wetlands are significant until proven otherwise. This fits with a climate crisis lens. This fits with an environmental science lens. This is evidence-based policy, really, and something that's not happening in Ontario. And here, of the many recommendations, most importantly, the Environmental Commissioner recommended the province must empower conservation authorities to effectively protect wetlands from all serious threats. Now, Bill 229 and some of the actions seem to be the opposite of empowering conservation authorities to effectively protect wetlands. In fact, in Duffins Creek, we saw the province intervene against the Toronto Conservation Authority, mandating development could occur on a provincially significant wetland. So it's clear, I think, the province has some motivations in this that are really holding us back. But given that the province is not leading, I think that really puts more pressure on the Conservation Authority to take a stand here. The province or higher levels of government aren't necessarily going to tell them what they have to do. They have the power to make a decision here, and all of us are impacted, so we need them to make the right one. So yeah, Dawn, what do we have kind of coming up?
Well, certainly keep speaking out, as the slide says. We're now almost exactly a year away from the next provincial election. It has to happen by the beginning of June of 2022. So the opportunity to change some directions provincially is presenting itself. And a few months after that, we have municipal elections in Hamilton. So opportunity again to see if our municipal councillors who we don't think are responding reasonably to the climate emergency that they declared, or are coming onto the Conservation Authority and acting in a way that is not positive for wetlands and positive for water and positive for the environment. We will have an opportunity to challenge them in the next municipal election. So both of those are there. I just wanted to say one more thing about tonight. We've got, as you all know, you're sitting here in an emergency rally. At 7 o'clock, the Conservation Authority meeting begins, and it is available on YouTube, so it can be watched. when exactly the hearing on the threat to the Ancaster Creek wetland will come up is not known. It is not the first item on the agenda. There is another hearing in advance of that and some other matters. So it may be a little while before that comes up. And I think, Alex, you were planning on doing some live tweeting to kind of alert people when that might happen.
Yeah, if folks follow the 350 Hamilton account, normally it's not me, but tonight you'll have special guest Alex behind the scenes, trying my best to keep up with what's going on in the Conservation Authority meeting and write it down for you all. And yeah, I will just say, like, we had 60 folks kind of write to the Conservation Authority. Sue was sharing in the chat. And the conversation's going to keep going. So we're going to hear from folks at with questions in a second as well. But just, I want to kind of reiterate what Don was saying about the kind of upcoming elections. In the chat, I saw someone said that we really need to rethink the citizen selection process, especially given the important role of citizens. I think like it's up to us to kind of start thinking about, not just like what nice words do we want to hear from the candidates knocking on our door, but like what commitments do we want people to have in that election when it comes to kind of rethinking how we do conservation. Dawn, is there anything to add before we go to a Q&A?
Yeah, one other thing is probably many of you are aware that there's something else going on tonight at 7 o'clock. It's a Stop Sprawl rally that Environmental Defense is organized. It runs from 7 till 8. And if you have to choose, that one plus the Conservation Authority meeting are both being recorded. So you can choose one and watch the other afterwards. And as I said, because we don't know the timing of when the issue is coming up on the Conservation Authority agenda, you may want to start by going to the Stop Sprawl webinar that Environmental Defense has put on. And it is on, I understand now, on YouTube, because they had such an enormous number of people who've registered for it. They've moved it to a live YouTube broadcast. And one of the people speaking there is Linda Lukasik from Environment Hamilton. So my suggestion would be, when you get out of this one, go to that one and watch Twitter with your other device, your phone or whatever, to see if you want to jump back in and watch what happens at the Conservation Authority meeting tonight. Q&A, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, so just, I think we're probably going to give this mostly over to Steph now, but thank you so much, everyone who came out. People were asking questions in the chat. I think for a lot of us, this is our first time thinking about how could our Conservation Authority work better for us? And I encourage us to keep reflecting on that question. We had this meeting tonight because, now we've got in contact with all 37 of us. Even if this proposal is voted down tonight, which we hope it will be, we'll have to stay in touch about further protecting our watershed. So thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and we'd love to answer some questions.
Hello again, everybody. I'm very sorry that the chat got just on me, so I did miss quite a few things, but I think I have it all. Thanks to another member of 350's help, Ria. Thank you, Ria, you're awesome. So I'm gonna go through what questions I have. And if I've missed anything or anyone wants to speak to a question, if I don't realize who it's from, you're welcome to do so. So in this case, I'm gonna ask the questions. And if I have your name, I will ask if you want to expand on them. And if I don't have your name because of my ability to do chatting for a bit there, I'll try to let you guys do it yourselves. Oh, and now I've got two devices going and one of them is being very angry at the other. That's not good. I don't know why that happened a few times. All right. So first question was, I don't know who this is from. We know what the warehouses are going to be used for, Don or Alex, or whomever might have an answer to that question.
Dawn.
We don't know what the warehouses are going to be used for, and that doesn't appear to be clear in the slides that the developers are presenting tonight. And for the Conservation Authority Board, it's actually an irrelevant question because whatever they're told tonight can change tomorrow. It doesn't change what the outcome is with respect to the Conservation Authority Board, because their job is to decide whether or not the wetland can be relocated and if that's an acceptable change. Their job is not to decide whether this development is a good idea or a bad idea. The normal process would be this development would go through the city planning department first. They would vet it, and they would then reach out to the Conservation Authority and say, okay, we've got this proposal, and part of it is they want to relocate a wetland. Can you comment on that, or can you provide a decision back on that? So we can talk about, the developers say 3,000 people are going to work here. They're going to build 5 warehouses. It's going to be a $250 million project, huge boost for Hamilton and so on. But none of that is certain. And none of that the Conservation Authority has no authority to ensure that those promises are actually followed through on. It could all change tomorrow. And one of the things that we know in terms of changing tomorrow is that last summer, the owners of the land, Frank Silvestri, and the company that he set up, severed the property at 140 Garner Road into 2 pieces. So the piece that we're talking about tonight is on the east side, adjacent to the Highway 6 extension. The piece on the left side, which is about the same size, is remaining as a residential property for one house, which happens to be on the market right now. If you've got some money saved up, it's $49 million is the asking price. It has 30,000 square feet, 16 parking garages. It's being compared, in fact, to the kind of thing that you could provide the same kind of reception that the White House could provide. So it's a very wealthy and a very expensive house sitting next door to this. So when they went to get this piece severed off from it, they needed a decision of the committee of adjustment, which is not very public committee in the city planning. And one of the things that they said, solemnly declared, all natural resources will be retained and protected, and there are no proposed revisions to any flood regulation areas. That was written part of their agreement in getting the property severed for this purpose, or for a purpose. At that point, the purpose wasn't clear. So that they changed up about 3 weeks later and put forward this proposal in its initial form. So their word may not be worth a whole lot.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Don. I guess we may or may not find out the answer to that question. Another question we have is from Francis, and I have asked them if they'd like to speak to it themselves, but I don't know if I had a response. So I will start reading it. And Francis, if you do want to speak to it at all, you're welcome to jump in. They asked, should one of our advocacy requests to have the province or municipality or conservation authority take ownership of all the remaining wetlands so the lands don't remain in private control?
It's a very good question, and it's a very good idea. The general manager of the Conservation Authority for 35 years, Ben Vanderberg, articulated the philosophy that if you want to save land, you buy it. The regulations are nice, but actually owning it is much better. The challenge is that while the Conservation Authority owns a fair bit of land at this point, it mainly owns land because people give it to them, or because of some earlier programs in which there was some funding available to do that. At this point, the only way that they purchase lands is on the basis of people making donations to the Hamilton Conservation Foundation. The city puts nothing into purchasing lands for the Conservation Authority, even though if you look at what's happened in the pandemic, these lands have become extremely popular. The numbers going to conservation areas over the last year have more than doubled, and not just in Hamilton Conservation Authority. The same thing is being reported from Grand River, from Halton, from the Niagara Peninsula Conservation, and other places. So a proposal certainly would be that the municipality, which seems to be able to find money to do other kinds of things, would be maybe very wise to put some money directly into the conservation authorities to help purchase land that the conservation authorities would then own and manage. And that would be a way certainly to address the challenges we have with the remaining wetlands being threatened by private development. And that's why we're facing the one that is happening here. These lands are private lands. They're not owned by the Conservation Authority. They're only regulated by them.
And Dawn, probably you have to get jumping off if you're going to try and delegate soon. Steph, do we have any other questions, Dawn? Maybe you could try to answer quick so we can get them done. And then you can get off to our conservation meeting.
We did have another question, but I'm not sure I fully understand it, and I haven't received a response from Anne. You got it? Yeah, go ahead, Anne. That's great. Thank you.
The reason is because I cut my thing on the side here has stopped. I can't get a chat in there, right? So that's why. Now, my question was, in the selection of the citizens on the Conservation Board, can people be nominated for that position? And do they consider it? The other question to that was, what are the requirements for people who sit on the Conservation Authority? And is there a balance?
Good questions. You can apply to sit on boards like the Conservation Authority. The decision is made by a committee of City Council. So you may get in, you may not. It's curious that the Conservation Authority composition at this point does not seem to reflect any of those people on City Council who have distinguished themselves as defenders of the environment. So we have all old folks there, except for one new councillor who ran for the Conservative government and lost, and then ran for council and got on, Esther Pauls. The others are longtime councillors and not known for being environmental defenders. So we seem to have a problem in terms of who gets on there, but you can actually put your name in. And it has been suggested to me that the nominations for citizens this time may have been heavily influenced by one or two councillors. And given what we're seeing in front of us tonight, those kinds of big developments by very wealthy people may very well be something that is tried to manage by making sure that the people on the board are ones who are going to agree or are at least not going to disagree. The strongest voice we've seen, there's a couple of people on the board that spoke against the offsetting policy. One of them is Brad Clark. Unfortunately, Brad has declared a conflict of interest for the hearing tonight. His son works for one of the people who's involved in some way. And the other one is a citizen, Cynthia Jansen. Susan Fielding, who is the representative from Puss Lynch, also voted against the offsetting policy. So those are the three that have articulated opposition to this. But unfortunately, Clark won't be part of the hearing tonight.
This speaks to the idea of lobbying when the selection is to be made next time.
Yes.
Okay.
There was one other comment quickly, Dawn, I'm not sure how much time you have, but basically Danielle was saying the big, oh, I know my train of thought went away, but isn't it surprising that nobody's talking about the fact that this is stolen land, developments happening on stolen land? Like, that's another aspect of this, yes?
Exactly. And that's the case for why we've lost so much in terms of wetlands across the province, because it isn't being managed by the people who managed it or didn't manage, but lived here and took care of it for thousands and thousands of years. It's all been taken away from them. And now there is no reflection of even a voice for Indigenous people at the Conservation Authority. And that was the other part of Anne's question in terms of diversity. In the Niagara Conservation Authority, there are some diverse faces and they're citizen appointments made by Niagara. In Hamilton, that doesn't seem to be the case. There hasn't been the opportunity taken to try and ensure that we have some better representation of the diversity of our community And there certainly hasn't been any effort to ensure an Indigenous voice or more than one Indigenous voice is part of the Conservation Authority Board. Those are quite reasonable, sensible things that should be part of the minimum part of the discussion. And really, we are in a situation where if we want the wetlands managed properly, they should be in Indigenous hands. And the call for a freeze on development, a moratorium on development within the Haldeman tract would be most welcome to be extended into the Hamilton area and elsewhere in the province. That call was issued by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy about a month ago.
Yeah, and just to add on, and we'd love if folks maybe wanted to talk on this point, but I think we're coming up in these webinars that we need to reimagine how we do conservation. And one of the constant things we've done is that the kind of inherent assumptions in a lot of the policy we have now are based about like land acquisition and ownership and stewardship that are just so inherently tied to the process of how colonization played out in shaping our communities, and whose economic rights were considered, whose kind of perspectives on what the water is and what our relationship to it were centered. So I think, yeah, this point that really folks who have had the most success in protecting their like the water have put themselves on the front line or have taken direct action to do so. And this is a plug to look at what's going on in Six Nations and the pushback to Nestle and the privatization and the selling of their water. This is a push to look at what's going on with the Hereditary Council in Six Nations, again, with the Protect Our Track call to action that just came out, where there's a call to cease development on the entirety of the Haldeman tract. And then, as Dawn mentioned, there's also calls for development to be ceased in Hamilton and protected in these areas as well. So yeah, I don't know if we want to hear from some folks. We have about 2 minutes left. Dawn, you may have to jump off early.
Yeah, I
but
probably
thank you.
should
I will
jump
say
off
thank you
and
everyone
get
for coming
into
out.
We will be, I will hopefully be part of the webinar, the fourth webinar that we're holding at the end of May. And the date will be the 26th of May for the next Conservation Matters webinar. And hopefully you'll be, hopefully I'll get to speak tonight at this meeting, and hopefully that will have some impact.
Thank you everyone for coming out. And yeah, I'm happy to stay on for a minute or two if some folks have more questions, but we are really looking at how to kind of keep engaging all of you in this work. It's not just about 350 showing up. Like, we need to build a coalition of citizens who are watching our conservation authorities and who are engaging. So yeah, we'd love for you to stay engaged.
Well, at this point, I don't have any more questions directly in the chat. A lot of you have your cameras off. I don't know if you know how to raise your hand with the icon. I was going to show you, but then I realized that I'm recording, so that will not go well if I try to do that. So does anyone have any questions? And if you don't know how to press that button, maybe somebody else from Hamilton 350 can help me out and let them know. And I see your hand, so.
During his talk, I think I heard him say something about that the province shouldn't be doing this. They're not legally allowed to do this, right? So if that's the case, down the road, would there be any opportunity for a court case?
So I know the province has definitely broken its own rules all of the time, and have lost court challenges on the environment before to no real ramifications beyond they have to say sorry and taxpayers lose a lot of money. But beyond that, there's no real ramifications unless the federal government can jump in. I think this really kind of gets to the question though about like, who are these, what are these laws set up to do? And even when someone's found something, found wrong, are they just being told, oh, just pay to make up for your mistake? The Conservation Authority does have clear policies regarding wetland preservation. And the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario has basically said, if you're going to look at offsetting, it should only be under the rarest circumstances. It should be completely unavoidable. It should lead to a net positive kind of look on wetlands. So like, if this is ever happening, we should be so careful about it. But what developers heard was, this can happen. You just have to ask hard enough. So I think it's really, this is something I think we're reflecting on, is like, is environmental law the only tool we have? Or, do we need to rely on some tools like meetings like these as well as other tactics as well to kind of supplement gaps in the law.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Kelly, I did see your hand up, so you are more than welcome to take the floor.
Thanks. Just really quickly, busy mom here. What is like the fastest, most impact that I can have to help right now? Like, what can I do to try to help?
So I would say send off an email to the Hamilton Conservation Authority, even though their meetings started, if you can. We've sent out some emails. I don't know, maybe staff, or like if you wanted to reach out to Hamilton 350 on any of its social media channels, or someone could maybe post in the chat those email addresses. But reaching out over email, making sure you flag with us that you're interested in staying in the loop. And then when we have these calls to action, you can kind of get noticed on them. You know, what right now we're doing is we're taking an approach of watching what's happening at these conservation authorities, and then following up and taking action based on what we see. We're also kind of trying to plan for the future a little bit as well. So if you have suggestions on kind of what else we need to add to the system, we'd love, you know, we'd be very interested.
Okay, I have one more question. It's a long shot, but I'm going to ask. So I'm teaching an environmental science course to students who are roughly grade 7 understanding level. And we actually have no lesson planned for tomorrow. Anybody want to do a spontaneous guest speaker tomorrow on Zoom? We're focusing on human health and the environment right now. So how impacts such as this would affect human health. So if anyone has an idea and nothing to do tomorrow at 10 a.m., I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Go for it, Alex.
I know it's like so last minute, but it just happened to be. So I just thought I'll throw it out there and see.
Put your email in the chat and let people think about it for a sec, and they'll hopefully make up their mind.
Yeah, it's
Sure,
too bad
sure.
that wonderful, she's a like a pharmacist, you know who I'm talking about. She spoke at City Hall, and she's so into health, and she's, oh darn, I wish I could remember her name. You know who I'm talking about? Oh,
I think
I don't know who you're talking about, unfortunately, Mary, but what I'll do, Kelly, is I'll send an email out to Hamilton 350 members and see if anyone is available. I can't guarantee Don because I have no idea because he's incredibly busy. I myself certainly can't speak to that.
We can try and arrange one for further in the future for sure. I just happened to last minute run into this, like, you know, sometimes time opens up, and anyway, so we can plan something for the future, but I just thought I've got some open time tomorrow. If anybody had any ideas of, or even just wants to summarize the meeting tonight, just to have a guest speaker or whatever, right? So anyway, I'm typing my email here and it's there if anybody's interested. Again, they're grade 11 students, but their comprehension is kind of closer to grade 7. So anyway, okay, well, here's hoping for a good outcome tonight, eh?
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I'll send that email out. I'll let them know that tomorrow, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. But we do have one more question here from Danielle, and then I think we're going to head out just in case things are moving quickly at the Hamilton Conservation Authority. So Danielle, go ahead.
Hey everyone, just quickly wanted to kind of follow up on the statement I made in the chat about being creative and imaginative outside of the system because of the work that we've been doing with Hamilton Harbor Water Walk. We know that City Council doesn't care. We know that City Council and Hamilton Conservation Authority don't have our best interests at heart, neither the land or the water. So how are we going to do the work that they're not going to do, right? So it's really up to us. And I want to encourage everyone to remember their own power and your own connections with the land and the water, and to uphold that responsibility to protect. I'm down at the beach right now, actually. Been kind of participating from here with my kids, staying grounded by the water. And I hope everyone else gets the chance to do that too. I know everyone wants to get off the meeting, so I just wanted to share that little bit. Just believe in yourself. Believe in the water. You can do it. You can make change. Just like, you know, you gotta believe in yourself and know that protecting the water and the land is the most important thing you could probably do in your life. And that's it. Thanks.
You're absolutely right, Danielle. And the thing is, like, I'm just going to talk quickly because I know Alex, I think they have to go as well for the conservation meeting, but that's what happened with the Duffins Creek situation. All the people in Pickering and Ajax that went out and, you know, rallied and wrote letters and things like that, was the voice of the people that it eventually changed that situation and allowed the MZO to be revoked or in the process of being revoked. So you're absolutely right. People power is key. And if we have more actions in the future, we will absolutely let you know about it. Anyway, I will turn it back to you, Alex, if you're ready to take over here, because I think you had something more you'd
We're
like to
going to
say.
close out with the notice that from Zoe, who's our honorary conservation watcher, because I haven't switched over yet, they have deferred the vote at the request of the proponent. So I'm going to take that as we scared them off tonight. Thank you to the 60+ people who sent emails. And how nice to end on a win for the folks who are still with us. So we'll keep watching, we'll keep you in the loop, but thank you. Have a party.
Yeah, now we can just go to the other one. We don't have to divide. Thank you so much, Alex.
Yes, thanks very much, Alex. Have a great night, everybody.
And
Thanks so much for coming
Stephanie
out.
and everyone.
No worries.
Bye.
Steph, it's Zoe here. Can you hear me?
Zoe? Yep.
Yeah. Did you hear that the Conservation Authority, at the request of the applicant, has deferred the Garner Road Section 28 hearing? They
Yeah,
have
that's what Alex just
okay.
said. That's
He got my text.
amazing.
Okay, he
Yes.
got my text. Okay,
He
thanks.
did. Yeah, they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
bye.
no, that's great. Thank you so much for keeping an eye on that for us. We're so over here.
Yeah,
So
okay.
awesome.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Anyone else have any questions or comments before we sign off here? No, good to go. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. I think that link is in the chat if you want to tune in to what's going on at the Conservation Authority meeting now, but might not be much happening now that that's been deferred. So congratulations, everyone. Great night.